The U.S. economy entered 2026 from a position of relative strength, continuing to outperform most advanced economies in 2025, a theme that is expected to persist in the coming year. That according to a new AM Best report. We're joined today by AM Best Director Ann Modica, who's here to discuss the outlook for 2026. So Ann, what are the key takeaways from this analysis?
So one of the key takeaways is that the U.S. economy is entering 2026 from a position of relative strength. For several years now, the U.S. economy has consistently outperformed most advanced economies, I think, and this is reflecting comparatively stronger productivity gains and sustained consumer demand. And this relative outperformance is expected to persist into 2026, with the IMF projecting U.S. economic growth at 2.4% compared to Euro area growth at 1.3% or Japan at 0.7%. And so this is a notable divergence in growth projections. And so while economic performance in 2025 was uneven for the U.S., this was mostly due to some volatility in the first half of the year in headline GDP, which reflected swings in both trade flows and inventories rather than a broad-based deterioration in domestic activity. Underlying all this growth was that demand proved more durable. The consumer, which represents about 2/3 of the U.S. economy, continued to spend at a relatively steady pace. And then with regards to the consumer, I will say that on the aggregate level, balance sheets do remain relatively healthy. However, I think these aggregate measures can obscure weakness and some of the ongoing strain among lower and middle class households. For example, we are seeing upticks in delinquency rates and also lower savings rates in these groups, which could impact spending going forward, particularly if there's something like a softening in the labor market in the future.
So, what does the labor data indicate and what role might that have?
So the labor market has softened over the course of 2025. It's been relatively noisy with a lot of different revisions, but we have seen a moderation in non-farm payroll gains. This was particularly true during the first half of 2025, and the unemployment rate ended the year in 2025 higher than at the start of the year. However, I will say, while there is a weakness, the labor market is not yet exhibiting signs of broad-based deterioration. Layoffs remain relatively contained, and while hiring has cooled, the adjustment so far appears more consistent with normalization from an unusually tight post-pandemic labor market rather than a sharp cyclical contraction.
And any sense of what to look for from the Federal Reserve?
So I think I'm going to look at two things this year. I think the first to keep your eye on is the growing division in the Fed with regards to what part of their dual mandate, either price stability or maximum employment, needs the most attention right now. The median projection in the Fed funds rate is 125 basis point cut. However, if we look at the range of all the FOMC participants, that range for the Fed funds rate is between 2.1 and 3.9 at the end of the year. So that really represents a pretty significant shift on how to think about policy rates moving forward. And then second, Jerome Powell, he will be ending his term as the Fed chair in May after 8 years of being at the helm. And so it does remain to be seen how the new Fed chair will take to his role.
Thanks, Ann.
Thank you, John.
That was AM Best Director Ann Modica. You can find the full report online at ambest.com. For AM Best TV, I'm John Weber.